we've got the brave adventurer at least.
Brave adventurer? You two couldn't find your way out of the village without training.
Imagine it's the early 2000s and I asked you to name the mascots for the major consoles of the time. I think everyone would have a pretty easy time of it. Nintendo? Mario, of course. Sega? Sonic. The newcomer to the field, Microsoft? Master Chief. It's all pretty easy until you ask about Sony. Sony has never really had one mascot that has defined their brand over the years. In the PS1 era, Crash Bandicoot was a potential contender, but it eventually moved to other platforms and the games struggled to maintain their popularity. During the PlayStation 2 era, there were many games that introduced some new contenders for the face of PlayStation. One of the first of these contenders were Jak and Daxter, who were the titular characters of the game I'm reviewing today, Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy. Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy is a 3D platformer that was developed by Naughty Dog. It was originally released in 2001 for the PlayStation 2. The version I'm playing is the port of the PlayStation 2 version on the PlayStation 4 that was released in 2017. This is not the remastered collection for the PlayStation 3. That's kind of confusing with all the different versions out there, but this is basically just a PlayStation 2 port that was put on the PlayStation 4. You can get the PlayStation 4 version of Jak and Daxter for $14.99 on the PlayStation Store, or you can buy a bundle that contains 4 Jak and Daxter games for $39.99 if you're interested in the whole series and want to save a bit of money. Jak and Daxter is also rated E10, and it's mainly for fantasy violence as you're beating up or shooting various creatures with fireballs. It's nothing too major here. Jak and Daxter kind of hit the middle ground when it comes to older platformer titles. The game doesn't have a lot of story, but it is a little more involved than just going to rescue a princess or a friend or something along those lines. The game starts off with our pair breaking the rules and visiting Misty Island, which is supposed to be off limits by order of Samos, the Green Sage. While exploring the island, they find it is swarming with beasts called lurkers, and that 2 shadowy figures are ordering the lurkers to gather eco and other precursor artifacts. Seeing this worries the pair and they try to escape, only for things to go wrong and for Daxter to fall into a pit of dark eco, which transforms him into this cute little animal, which is called an otzel, which is like a combination between an otter and a weasel. They return to the Green Sage, who is not particularly happy with them disobeying his orders. However, he is unable to turn Daxter back and tells the pair that the Dark Sage, Gol Acheron, might be able to help turn him back because he is the Sage of Dark Eco and knows more about it than anyone else. So the duo sets off to find their way to the Dark Sage with support from Samos and his daughter Kira. Of course, things aren't that simple. The teleport system between the sages' houses are not working, and the only way to the next sage is to travel through the Fire Canyon. This requires you to collect enough power cells for Kira, who is this world's equivalent to an engineer, to upgrade her zoomer to deal with high temperatures. You gain these power cells by doing a variety of activities in and around your village. This can range from leading animals back to their pens, finding certain hidden power cells, beating strong creatures, or even just finding precursor orbs to pay for them from villagers or various idle precursor statues that you find in the game. As you progress to each area, you find a similar issue at each new location you unlock. The next sage won't be at their house, and while you can activate the teleporter to go back to previous locations, you have to figure out how to get to the next place by getting more power cells to get past an obstacle keeping you from moving forward. As you progress, you realize that something much bigger is going on in the world, and it is up to you two to figure out what it is and put an end to it. As much as I'd like to say that the bigger arc of the story feels engaging, it really doesn't. It has a bit more depth than some of the other platformers of the early 2000s or earlier, but it's not deep enough to really feel any kind of emotional investment. Progression is too based off of random events and actions to get power cells and precursor orbs that there isn't a lot of story or motivation for what the villains are trying to accomplish, and the world doesn't particularly feel very cohesive. Though again, I would say that it does try to be a bit more than some other 3D platformers of the era, as it does have this kind of interconnected world, and it isn't just kind of going to a random level select and picking a random world and going there, just disconnected from the bigger hub area. Now, platformers like this aren't always known for their story, but they're usually known for their tight gameplay. Does Jak and Daxter have gameplay that is able to make up for a story that is maybe above average in the platforming genre, but is not necessarily great either? And again, the results here are a bit mixed. At the most basic level, Jak and Daxter is pretty much what you would expect from a 3D platforming game. You're given a playground of various environments to explore by moving and jumping through the various parts of the level. Jak and Daxter also have a couple of basic attacks that they use, and there is this temporary power-up system system in the form of different colors of eco. The big problem is that some features feel rather dated, not as tight as they should be, or just lacking altogether. The biggest offender that made the game feel dated right away was an inverse camera control scheme. I get that the original game was in 2001, where this way maybe was a bit more common. However, since this is a re-release, I figured they would have at very least an option to switch camera schemes in case that there are the purists who want the game to control just like it did in the original release. Now, I've never liked inverse camera controls, so I really wish that there was a way to change it here, and there is not a very obvious one. Now, the double jump in the game was the move that I felt that was just not nearly as tight as it could have been. I know that throughout the game, I had difficulty getting the move to work at times. I'm not really sure what would stop it from working and why it did sometimes and then didn't in other situations, but it just didn't feel nearly as tight as other platformers I've played. In general, movement felt a bit stiffer, but it was still decent. It wasn't like it ruined the experience, but it just felt like it was a bit stiffer than it needed to be. And I'm not really sure why. Maybe it's just the datedness, or maybe some of the port issues that just kind of kept it from being quite as smooth as the original release. Now, the feature that felt lacking for me was the idea of a dash or a run button or feature to the game. Now, the quickest way to get around is by doing this weird jump roll where you roll and then you jump kind of at the end of the roll and it kind of pushes you forward, which is just kind of an awkward way of traveling. I've really noticed that there was an absence of a quicker movement ability. Now, I'm guessing that part of this is due to the fact that blue eco increases your speed, and so they thought that they would just tie running with that, but I personally still miss a kind of dedicated run ability that allowed you to move a little bit faster. Now, as I said at the beginning, when I started talking about gameplay, the experience was mixed. I've talked about my biggest issues and kind of the negative things, but really the rest of the gameplay in Jak and Daxter is an enjoyable experience. Levels are fun to explore in order to find power cells or precursor orbs. The game is also pretty ahead of its time in having counters for your progress in each of the areas, letting you know where you might have missed a power cell or some precursor orbs. Considering this was a PlayStation 2 game and trophies and achievements weren't a thing, it's kind of a surprising feature, but I really enjoyed it, and it did actually help when I was going after the trophies and achievements in the game. Now, in addition to the basic moves that I've already kind of talked to, there are that power-up system that I mentioned earlier. Now, eco is kind of the way that the power-ups go, and most of them act one way, but there is one that acts a little bit of a different way. Green eco is the one that kind of acts a little bit different than everybody else, and it's the most common type, and it's used to regain health. Now, Jak starts out with 3 health, and each time you get hit, you'll lose 1 of these health. The bad thing about green eco, though, is that the most common version is a very small little bit of green eco, which you need to collect 50 of in order to regain 1 health point. You can find larger clusters of green eco that will heal 1 part automatically, but these are more rare. I found them sometimes, but I didn't find them nearly as much as the smaller little pieces. Also, if you have full health, you can start collecting these small parts to prepare for the next time you may lose a health, but it caps at 50. So it basically gives you the idea of 1 extra health point to have it kind of refill automatically if you do get hit. The other types of eco act more like temporary power-ups and give different abilities. The duration of the power-up is displayed on a gauge on screen, and the more clusters of a certain color of eco you collect, the more and more eco you'll be given. I know that sounds rather straightforward, but it's actually if you get a piece of eco, a blue eco, and then you get another eco of that same color, you'll get the same amount, but also a little bit of a bonus to that energy. So it basically adds a little bit extra eco for each cluster of eco that you've collected while under that certain color's effect. Now, blue eco allows you to move faster, cause collectibles to be attracted to you, and give energy to unpowered technology that you run into. Blue eco is probably the second most common kind of eco and is required for some puzzle style moments where you need to figure out how to have blue eco to activate a certain bit of technology, like a hidden cache of orbs, a locked door, or a jump booster. Now, red eco gives you more attack power, allowing you to defeat stronger enemies quicker. I felt like this was the least common kind of eco, or at least it was maybe just the kind that I thought was more useless or had very limited use, and so I just didn't notice quite as much. But yeah, red eco wasn't super interesting to me. Yellow eco, on the other hand, allows Jak to shoot fireballs and can damage enemies or blow up metal strongboxes you find in some levels. And this was useful for finding boxes with orbs, so that if you're trying to go for some of the collection sides of the game, you needed to find these boxes and ways to destroy them, and yellow eco was usually the way that was done, and was also used in a couple of the boss battles as a way to damage them. In addition to the basic platforming sections, there were also vehicle sections of the game. Sometimes vehicles were used to explore sections of a certain area, so you might use a zoomer, kind of like a hover bike in this world, for exploring a watery area, or a rideable bird-like creature that helps you jump from platforms that are too far apart for you to jump on your own. Other times the vehicle sections were more like roads that you use to travel to a new hub area. Not that they were actually roads, but just kind of a straight linear path that you just had to try to figure out how to survive from point A to point B. Now, while the vehicle sections do help break up the game a bit, I honestly didn't find these sections to be that amazing. The zoomer didn't exactly have the best handling in the world, so it made trying to do some of the more intricate navigating a bit frustrating at times. I mean, it wasn't terrible. Again, it's kind of just like this mixed bag. It was like, it wasn't great, but it wasn't awful. It was just kind of this like, it was just flawed, I guess, at the end of the day. Now, I think that with many of these things though, like while I would say that they're flawed, they would have been really impressive feeling when released. However, going back to them now, while they still feel decent, they don't feel as fresh as they would have in 2001. Over time, there have been further refinements to moves and vehicles and things like that in either platformers or other 3D action games that makes coming to this game again feel a little bit like a step backwards. Jak and Daxter are colorful and vibrant games that really create an interesting world to explore. Of course, since this is just a port of the PS2 version, the game does show its age when compared to more modern games. It does lead you to wonder why they didn't try to release the remastered version for the PlayStation 4 instead of just a port of the PlayStation 2 version, as I'm sure that would have helped the game look a little bit better. That's not to say that Jak and Daxter looks terrible for a game over 20 years old. It's actually still quite nice to look at. It's just obvious that the game is older. As one who doesn't really care about games being cutting edge in graphics, this doesn't bug me, but it is kind of the reality of the game. In terms of music and sound, I feel like the highlight is going to be the voice acting here. The snarky antics of Daxter are particularly a highlight, but you may also get a bit tired of his witticisms if and when you die over the course of the game. This isn't to say that the music is bad, it's just not really stand out. The various background themes fit the areas that they are for, but I personally just felt like they weren't as memorable as themes from other games or even other platformers, to be honest. In terms of performance, I didn't really have any major issues. There were no crashes, and I didn't really notice much slowdown, although there might have been the occasional slowdown here and there in certain transitional spots, or if there's a lot going on the screen. The only other issue I might mention here is that the camera sometimes was pretty awful in helping you see where you're going and what you're trying to do or anything, especially in tight quarters. So if you get to like a corner or get to an area where, you know, there's things around you a little bit, it was really hard to see. Now, it didn't happen that often, but it did happen from time to time. Camera was just something I wasn't a fan of in this game in general, like with the inverse scheme and just how it kind of got wonky on you in certain areas. That was probably my biggest issue. Now, I had played Jak and Daxter a few times when it was first released on the PlayStation 2, but not a whole lot. I never beat it. I don't even know if I got halfway through it. This means that I'm coming to the game without a lot of nostalgia. So this makes it kind of a tough game to measure. As a game that released in 2001, I can see how it was very competent and even pushed the boundaries of the genre in terms of story and trying to present a connected world. I also feel part of the issue is some of the decisions made when releasing the PlayStation 4 version. It seems like the PS4 version was a step backwards from the PlayStation 3 release of the Jak and Daxter collection. That version had options for camera control, improved graphics, and the kind of improvements that you would expect for a re-release. The PlayStation 4 doesn't really have any of these, and it feels like a step backwards since it's just releasing a port of the PlayStation 2 version. Or at least it sounds like it's a step backwards anyway, as I didn't play the PlayStation 3 version. So finding this information about the PlayStation 3 version makes me wonder how many of my criticisms of this version would still be there if that version was what got released, or something similar to that version was what was released. I can very much see why Jak and Daxter became a beloved series, and to be honest, I am looking forward to trying the other games in the series as well. Even so, I still have to rate the PlayStation 4 version of Jak and Daxter, the Precursor Legacy, a 7 out of 10. Jak and Daxter is a good game. Some of the dated mechanics and decisions to go a bit backward in releasing the game on the PlayStation 4 just produce some noticeable flaws. This is by far the most accessible version of the game, since you can play it on the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, which are the most up-to-date and current PlayStation consoles. But even so, it makes the decision to go backward even more puzzling. You'd think you'd want your best version to be the one most accessible to current players. Now, I'm sure that if you love Jak and Daxter and have fond memories of playing it earlier in life, that you will probably really enjoy this bit of nostalgia and enjoy your time with Jak and Daxter. But for those who didn't grow up with Jak and Daxter, you may find yourselves less impressed by this duo's first outing.
Say something really teary at the funeral, like, "How am I gonna get Shane back now?"